Welcome to No One Tells You This. I'm Laura Massetti. Most career advice tells you to work harder, learn more, and collect more skills and frameworks. Nobody tells you that at some point, all of this plateaus. Nobody tells you that the real inflection point in your career does not come from doing more of what you already do. They come from being in rooms that you would otherwise not be in, with people who you would not have otherwise met. My guest today has built his entire body of work around this idea. Giuseppe Stigliano is a global CEO, Thinkers 50 honoree, HBR Advisory Council member, and co-author of 3 books with Philip Kotler. It is an absolute honor for him to be joining the podcast today because he has such an incredible career. He is a marketing leader. He's a global CEO of 3 companies in the past, and there's so much that the audience today can learn from. I'm so excited. So, Giuseppe, let's get into it.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I want to provide some context because I know I introduced you, but I cannot do it justice like you can. So if you can share a little bit more on your background, your journey, and what you're up to now.
Well, I guess the best way to describe myself is a marketing nerd, meaning that I have studied marketing, specialized in marketing, did my master in marketing. I hold a PhD in marketing. I co-authored 3 business books translated into 15 plus languages with Philip Kotler, who is the 95-year-old father of marketing. And I have been the CEO of 3 marketing advertising firms, and I advise companies these days on marketing. So I guess marketing has been my life forever, and that's what I do. It's not what I am or who I am, but it's what I do. Who I am is someone in love with the idea of sharing as much as possible of what I've learned with others, hoping that they can get the most out of it and turn it into an asset for their career.
Amazing. And I have been following along with you on LinkedIn and all the other social profiles. I could see the marketing background coming through and all that you do. So tell me, I'm particularly interested in this Next Leap program that you have going on. Tell me a little bit more on your motivation for that and what that is.
So basically, I've been doing what I do for 25 years now. So of course, when you are on the consulting side of the story, you end up speaking with so many managers from so many different companies, different industries, different geographies. So I just realized at a certain point that I had a fair, let's say, audience that I had conversations with about how to grow, how to deal with the complexity of the market, how to deal with this word that changes at the speed of an algorithm, and how to make sure that your skills and your mindset stay current. And what can you do? Is it an MBA? Is it an executive education? Is it whatever? And I just realized that for some of us, including myself, when you reach a certain level in your career, what you lack is not necessarily coaching or mentorship programs or an MBA or a master, either because maybe you did it already, or because what you really need is something different, which I frame as exposure. So my assumption, my bet, and my idea is that some people, when they reach a certain level in their career, they need, in order to grow, they need to be exposed to basically 3 things. 1, curated content. Because of course there is content out there. Of course you can watch all the TEDx and the TED and whatever. But it's too much and it's overwhelming. So what people usually need is someone who knows them, knows their challenges, understands where they are, and can curate content, either literally producing content on purpose for what that specific segment needs, or curating. So like cherry picking stuff online and packing in a way that makes sense for the audience. So exposure to curated content is 1. 2, exposure to peers who are sharing the same, again, challenges, opportunities, situation in different countries, in different industries, so that you can compare notes and you can learn from each other, unlocking what I call collective intelligence. So if you can build a safe place where peers share their experiences, their ideas, their challenges, and learn from each other, that's the right kind of exposure to peers that I believe in. And third, exposure to people who fly at a different altitude. So, for example, in the case of a middle manager, it would be probably a C-level or a CEO or even a regional or global CEO, someone who frames problems in a different way, someone who is used to make decisions under pressure or a different pressure, like higher pressure, probably with more articulated and complicated and complex repercussions and so on and so forth. So my bet was to build an environment, a community for middle to senior managers who aspire to make the next leap through curated exposure to content, a group of peers, and more senior leaders, let's say, CEOs in this case. And that's what I'm trying to do.
And that's amazing. And I can absolutely resonate with that point in my life. And I'm still in that point now of trying to figure out what's next. And knowing that you've developed skills, you've schooling, experience, all of the above, and you get to a point of saying, well, what's next? I have this skill, I have this spectrum. What do I do with it in a material way? And you've seemed to have created that opportunity of exposure and learning all in one place.
Yeah, that's the idea. And also, I just wanted to leverage everything I learned working with Professor Kotler, working with some of the most inspiring CEOs in the world. And so and that's probably my academic version, if you want, right? My PhD, my professor hat that says, you know what, let's try and distill some guiding principles, some learnings, some do's and don'ts so that people who are, in their career, maybe slightly earlier compared to where I've been, they can build on that. They can capitalize on that. They can see that content and use it as a lens to, be applied to their reality.
Yeah. I love what you said at the beginning about the content curation piece of it, because just being in an online nature with AI, social media, everything, we're being completely bombarded with smart people that give us information, direct and point of view, but it's in such a flip of the moment interaction that you have with it that I've been really focused now on finding who are those inspiring people out there that I am going to be completely invested in their journey and say, I want to follow the path that you took, right? And I think that you're really creating the environment to say, you went through XYZ in your life, learned this the hard way, learned it the long way. This is the opportunity to kind of accelerate that for many people.
Yeah, I guess this is the point. I met Professor Kotler 10 years ago. After 40 minutes, he said, you should write a book. And I said, I've never thought about writing a book. Why should I do it now? And he said something like, he said, because I'm going to write the foreword for you. And so, of course, I was very motivated at the moment. And then he loved the book and said, forget about the foreword. I'm going to be your co-author. So we ended up writing books together. But the reality is that what he loved was the idea of working with someone who was both an academic, because I hold a PhD and I've been teaching for 20 years, and a practitioner, because I've been, climbing the corporate ladder for the last 25 years, and I've been a CEO 3 times. So I guess that is the key for one reason. This is at least my version of the story. Actually, originally, it was Kotler's version of the story. He said, if you are a great professor, you know a lot about how to transfer knowledge. But the knowledge you have is not the knowledge of a practitioner. It's the knowledge of someone who is used, and it's very good at, in many cases, distill knowledge from conversations, books, papers, research, different sources, but not direct experience. Vice versa, if you're a practitioner, you've been the CEO of whatever large established companies, and you tell about your journey, you let the audience make the effort of translating whatever your experience is successful into learnings for them, because it's not your job. You're not a professor, so it's not your job to make it digestible for the audience. Your job is to share your story. Hopefully they can get the most out of it, and that's it. The blend between the two. So the moral obligation, other than the tendency and the attitude of the professor to nurture the mind of the audience, because that is a moral obligation. It's your job There is no way you can leave that room, virtual or physical, unless most of the people, ideally all the people in the room, have understood and can apply what you have shared. So that's the moral obligation of the professor. But if you can blend what you share with hands-on experience so that you make it at the same time theoretical and rigorous, but also hands-on, practical, with examples, with anecdotes, with stories from the boardroom, at least for some people, let's put it this way, for some people, mid-level, I bet, is exactly what they need. Because if it's pure theory, they're too seasoned to be willing and happy to receive pure theory. But if it's pure practice, they cannot necessarily connect the dots because they're not the CEO of Walmart yet. And so, I want to help those people who are in the middle, trying to bring the most out of the two words.
Yeah, I love that. And you're so right, because university or a lot of the lectures and talks are so theoretical in nature. And you just want someone to be like, I just want to do it like him. And I need an example of how it pertains in my real life. And I think that's where your marketing leadership comes together in such a natural way.
Hopefully.
So tell me a little bit more on your journey itself in terms of, people are going to say, well, how do I get what he has? How do I become a CEO of 3 companies? And we all know it never starts in the way that you initially thought that it would, right? So tell me a little bit more on you got started at the beginning of your career.
Well, I think I was lucky enough to be exposed to the right people and the right situation. And probably I was also lucky and brave enough to put myself into rooms where I certainly didn't belong in the first place. Like literally every time I was like, what am I doing here? How can I bring value to this room? How can I? And so, of course, you basically shut up and learn, right? That's what you do when you are not. But I have done that systematically. And so the way I will frame it is I probably, especially at the beginning of my career, I systematically chose discomfort over status. Like literally, that's what I did. I started by creating my own company and with a couple of business partners. And we were a tiny agency focused on unconventional marketing in Milan. And we went from zero to hero, for what hero was for me at the time, but to the point that a big holding reached out to acquire us. So, of course, I was proud and happy of the results. But I remember those years in which I was pretending of being my assistant. Like literally I had 2 email addresses and I was like sending calendar invites from another address because I couldn't say I didn't have an assistant because I was claiming I was the CEO of my company. But we were, it was literally me, myself, and I at some point. So, I remember clients or partners telling us, yeah, let's have a meeting. And we were like, yeah, we're restructuring, but we didn't have a meeting room. So, I remember those days. And of course, I was 22, 23, whatever. And so I was excited, but also frustrated and embarrassed at some point. So I guess that attitude, it's not for everyone. I'm not saying it's necessarily the right thing to do, but in my case, that has paid back. So if people are happy with the, it's again, you don't feel at ease, you don't feel cool, but if you're happy with that, you learn a lot. And the other thing, and again, these are different. That was my personality. On a learning curve from 0 to 70%, you typically go fast. And then from 70 to 100, you go super slow. And when you reach 95%, the last 5% can take 20 years. So I am someone, and so some of the people can relate, others not, who goes very fast from 0 to 70 and very slow after that. And I get very bored after that. So my motivation goes down and I become even more slow, even slower. So point is, if you are someone who burns fast, who loves, learning as much as possible in a short period of time, and then learn something else, moving from one room to the other, systematically realizing that you don't belong because you start from scratch every time, is what will accelerate your career, your journey, whatever the journey is, exponentially. So if you are like me, the tip is move fast, Don't break things. That's I'm not a big fan of that quote, but move fast. Like go from 0 to 70% in 1 year, 2 years, move fast, go somewhere else, put yourself into different rooms, learn from everyone, ask questions, make sure you have the right boss so you get exposed to the right examples, and, just move and keep moving. Then at a certain point, that's probably the best tips I've ever received. Stop pretending you can be good at too many things. It's not realistic. So when you start being in your 30s, just accept the fact that you're not good at certain things and stop pretending you can be good, because you cannot. You can be average, assuming that you are below average because you're not good. So there is no point in putting so much effort to reach a mediocre level when you can double down on what you're good at and become excellent. Don't do this too early in the journey because you don't know. But when you start being in your 30s, which is what I was lucky enough to do, just double down on what you're good at. So if you combine the two things, so when you're very young, you experiment like crazy, you put yourself in rooms you don't belong, you learn as much as possible, you experiment, including with the things you're not good at, to measure the gap between average and where you are, that's one thing. But when you turn 30, ideally, it can be 35, it can be 25, whatever. Every person is different. But when you start becoming more mature and more self-aware, just double down on what you're good at. Stop doing what they taught you should do at school, where you needed to reach a fair grade in every single topic, otherwise you wouldn't pass. So that's probably the best learning and what helped me the most.
That's really good advice. And I'm sure you feel a sense of relief once you say, I have to stop carrying the responsibility of all these things that I'm not good at.
Totally, absolutely. But again, it's not for everyone. Not, people are different. My brother, so just to name someone who is, 1 year younger, and so we grew up together, is totally different. Like, he needs to get as close as possible to that 100% in one thing to feel that he's doing the right thing. So I would get bored. He becomes fully aware and he feels like he is doing the right thing and he feels completely, fully, in the right place, right? So it's totally subjective.
Yeah. Oh, I think that self-awareness piece is fundamental for all of this. You need to be really self-aware of how you operate, how you're motivated,
Correct.
what drives you. One piece I want to talk about for a moment is you mentioned this theme often. I know it's core to the next leap is this piece of exposure. So tell me a little bit more on what exposure means to you in the professional.
You're right. It is connected to self-awareness, because the more you're self-aware, the more you know the people you want to be exposed to and you learn more from, right? Because the reality is that the idea is to absorb as much as possible from the right people. But that idea of right is not one size fits all. So if you're self-aware, you know where you want to go. You know who you are. You know which are the bets you want to double down on. And once you have that clarity, you need to surround yourself with people who are way better than you. So you need to expose yourself to people who are ideally the best at what you are very good at, so that you can, be exposed and learn at exponential speed. So for example, I knew I was good at marketing. I knew I had been trained for that, and I knew it was my passion, so that I was always, reading yet another book. And remember, and I still like this, if I'm not fully aware of a specific concept in the domain of marketing, it is not tolerable for me. I need to read it. If I don't remember the sequence of steps on something, I feel like I'm an imposter. I can't accept that. So if that is that typically happens with your passion, right? When you are doing something that it's not only your job, but also the reason you wake up in the morning, in terms of motivation, in terms of realization. And so I tried and succeeded in being exposed to Professor Kotler, who is the father of the discipline. I was lucky, of course, it doesn't happen every day. But what I mean is, if you decide that is your passion and that's what you want to be good at, and you find a way to be exposed, either literally working together or at least subscribing to his community or her community, reading their newsletters, reading their books, trying to absorb as much as possible, watching their interviews, that is what I mean by exposure. I just feel like when you're exposed to what you want to become and people who you can sort of literally download content, ideas, the way they frame problems, the way they answer a question, the way they handle a debate, the way they frame also a concept, the way they summarize things, and so on and so forth. No, at the beginning, you literally copy paste, literally. Like some of the things I remember, Kotler was framing something. I was like, this is just perfect. There's no reason for me to change anything. I'm going to just copy paste and quote him. That's it. Then the more you grow, the more you have experience, the more you apply your filter. So maybe it's less copy paste and more your version of the story. And you start adding value or incremental value, extra value on something that was already valuable. And then you enrich it with an anecdote from your experience, and that becomes yours. Like literally, because you are building on something, adding a different version of the story, adding some flowers, make it yours, and telling in a way that is more personal, that becomes yours. But that's a process, I believe.
So interesting. And I think too, when I was taking on my first vice president role, I walked in not knowing anything, truly not knowing anything. And I wish that I had someone or a program or something along the way to say, like, this is the level of something that you need to get exposure to, be in the right room with people. Because at that point, or at least how I felt at that time, is if I asked questions, if I ask someone for help, if I go to whomever to say, I want to follow along with you, I have to ask you questions, getting that exposure that you're talking about, I felt vulnerable. I felt like I couldn't ask those things because it would make me look weak or couldn't be in that room. And I was trying to fake being in that room the whole time. So I like that what you're building is something that kind of gives that sense of security and privacy as well to those leaders that might be a little vulnerable to identify themselves as needing help.
Totally. And that's the purpose. That's why it's a closed community. So I totally agree with what you're saying. And I also agree that vulnerability is an underrated skill. It's not something you're typically trained for, nor in business, neither in business nor in personal life. I belong to an organization called YPO, which is basically an association of CEOs. And we meet with my forum, with my group, we meet every month. And vulnerability is one of the keywords there, right? Because you are in a safe, closed group of peers. We always remind ourselves of the nothing, no one, never mantra at the beginning of every session. And of course, you not only allowed, but encouraged to be. And I remember the first sessions, I didn't have the words to express my feelings because I was simply not used to do it. I could not articulate my feeling in the middle of a situation. And so bottom line is vulnerability is key, but that's when, this is a good example of what I meant before by blending the academic rigor with the hands-on experience. Buy the book. There's plenty of leadership books and articles about the importance of vulnerability and the fact that it's important because in the past it was not something that managers would do because managers were taught to be know-it-all and to have all the answers. And so vulnerability is key. I'm with that. I'm with the authors. I agree. But that's theory. If you're the CEO of a company, the third time you say, I have no idea, you show your vulnerability, but your CFO reaches out to your global CEO and say, hey, this guy has no idea. We need help. So I get that. It is true, but let's make sure we don't get naive about that. Vulnerability is important, crucial. But it doesn't mean that you can wake up every day, especially if you're a business leader or a leader in whatever situation, and you go there and say, guys, I have no idea, but let's figure it out. At the third time, you're like, why they're paying you the salary? So, practical experience reminds me that it's a good rule of thumb. It's good in principle. You need to practice it, but it's not for everyone every day in every situation. There are situations in which you need to pretend that you have the answer because you need to open the umbrella and protect the people who are there. And because, especially in some cases, more junior people shouldn't know that you don't know because you need to protect them. So I'm a big fan of vulnerability, but let's make sure we don't get naive about that.
Yeah, you're right. I remember I was flying to Italy a couple of weeks ago. And when I was on the plane, stewardess I'm a bad flyer. So I was like, what's that noise on the plane? And she told me, I don't know. And I think you're right. Is like when you're certain instances where you can be vulnerable and say, but there's other instances when you can't do those things, right? And it takes a lot of practice and development of yourself as a leader to know when
Correct.
that makes sense where.
Correct. And also to read the room and understand that in certain rooms, certain people can handle that and other rooms, maybe not. So that's part of being a leader.
Right. And I
It's called
think
empathy.
the hardest, yeah. I think it's also the hardest part to teach, right? In terms of those that you mentor and in your course as well, as far as like how to read the room in certain instances and make decisions around that.
Yeah. So certain things can be taught, like good leader takes half of the credit and the merit, double the responsibility. That's something you can inoculate in someone and like, okay, good. So when we are successful, it's a teamwork. When we are wrong, it's my responsibility. Click. You make that click, and so you can teach that. But in terms of reading the room, understanding if all the people were listening, and if we want to be brutal, are paid to handle that. Because the reality is that some people could say, you know what? I don't want to know. It's not my business. It's your business to deal with that uncertainty, with that impossibility to plan, with that, also with the repercussions of whatever decision you need to make. It's not my business. So sorry, I don't want to know. Get that. It's just normal. There are certain people don't want to know. They don't want to handle that. It's normal.
One question that I ask all of my guests is early on in my career, I didn't know this. And once I found this out, it's changed everything for me in my career. What is that for you?
So this is something someone told me. And honestly speaking, first time I heard that, I couldn't process it. So I sensed that it was something cool. It got like stumped in my head, but I wasn't sure. And now I fully supporting this idea. And the line, if you want, goes and says, when you become a leader, like while you grow up, let's put it this way, when you start having a team, and so you can delegate part of what you do, there's only one rule. Only you can do. Okay? What's the point? Point is, if you get promoted, it means you're very good at doing what you do. You get promoted again and again and again. At some point, for some reason, because it's not that immediate, they think that you can have a team, which is an assumption, right? The fact that you're very good at doing something doesn't mean that you're good as a team leader. But let's pretend it's true. They give you a team. And at that point, you should stop doing what you do because your job as a manager, meaning you manage people, is no longer to deliver. It's to coordinate the people who are part of your team to create the conditions for the team to deliver. That's different. It's still need to do something, but in theory at least, most of what you do is coordinating and creating the conditions. Part of the job is still on you, maybe, but it's part of the job. So you should be more an orchestrator than someone who's playing an instrument. Hence, only do what only you can do and delegate the rest. So in theory, you should keep for yourself the opening the umbrella when it's raining to cover everyone. You should keep for yourself the tough conversations with the boss. You should keep for yourself the arguments with someone else, maybe someone who is in your family. So vulnerability, sure. But I don't think a good leader should go every day to the office and say, hey guys, sorry, I'm in a bad mood. Who cares? It's your problem. You're in a bad mood, your problem. Of course, there are some teams where you have a better relationship. There are situations where you can do that. But this idea that, you should show your true self. No, please, sorry, I don't want to see your true self. I want to see your professional self. Then when we grab a coffee, if you want to tell me about your true self, sure. But not when we're working. So only you can do means focus on what you're very good at, what is your responsibility, and create the conditions for the team to thrive. Then, if you need to help someone, do the work because you miss one of the key resources. Of course, you need to deliver as well. But that's no longer your job if you become a manager. So every time you are doing something as a manager, as a leader, ask yourself, is this something only I can do? Is there anyone else here who could do this? And learn from it and grow and become even better than I am at doing this? If the answer is yes, your job is to create the conditions for them to do it at best, not do it yourself because it's faster, or do it yourself because this way you protect your job, or do it yourself. If you're doing that, even if you don't realize it, first, you're not a good leader. Second, you're just doing something wrong.
Yeah, that's super powerful advice and a reminder that I need to hear all the time because I don't do that myself. So thank you for inspiring today. And thank you so much, Giuseppe. So where can folks find you and find your course and find everything else related to following up with you?
Best way is my website, which is my full name, giuseppestigliano.com. And of course, LinkedIn as well. I'm on Instagram as well, but it's more like a blend of personal and professional. Like say LinkedIn and my website are the go-to places.
Amazing. It will all be provided in the show notes. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much. Super. Ciao.
Grazie, ciao.